The story didn't begin with a confrontation or even a tear. It began with the absolute, deafening silence of an empty home at 4 a.m. Dante Jehoon Vance stepped out of the private elevator and into the entrance hall of his penthouse, his fingers still tracing the gold VIP band wrapped around his wrist. Down in the neon alleys of Gangnam, the bass was still thumping, and the scent of Suri's expensive perfume still clung to the fabric of his jacket. He had spent the last 6 hours inside the ultra-exclusive lounges of Club Nebula, buying out entire floors, pouring premium champagne for a rival cartel leader's daughter, and ignoring the 3 urgent calls that had illuminated his phone screen. He had left his phone face down on the marble tables because, in his mind, his marriage was a permanent contract. Amara was a quiet, gentle woman with no family and soul and nowhere else to go. He assumed she would do what she always did, suffer his absence in silence, sleep on the couch, and have his espresso machine warming up by dawn. But when he punched his code into the high-tech digital lock, the heavy iron door swung open into a void. The penthouse wasn't just dark, it was freezing. The central heating had been shut off hours ago, leaving the vast, minimalist space feeling like an abandoned gallery. There was no soft breathing from the bedroom, no ambient light hum from the kitchen. "Amara," Dante called out, his voice sharp with the irritation of a man unaccustomed to waiting. He slammed his palm against the master light switch, flooding the apartment with a blinding white glare. The living room was perfectly ordered, the silk cushions untouched. Dante marched toward the kitchen, his heels clicking loudly against the polished stone floor. "Amara, stop the games. I told you my corporate consulting meetings run late on Thursdays." He rounded the corner into the kitchen, and the words died in his throat. Sitting precisely in the center of the pristine white marble island was a massive, traditional Korean ongi clay pot. It looked entirely out of place against the Italian cabinetry. Dante walked over, his brow furrowed, and looked inside. The jar was filled to the brim with thick, permanent, jet-black calligraphy ink, the heavy, indelible ink his syndicate used to brand the skin of their runners and stamp their international shipping manifests. Submerged at the very bottom of that dark, staining liquid, glinting faintly beneath the murky surface, was Amara's multi-carat diamond wedding ring. Next to the clay pot lay a single folder containing signed divorce papers, completely filled out, with her signature dry and set. Her house keys were placed neatly on top of the documents. Dante stared at the jar. The alcohol vanished from his system in an instant, replaced by a cold, violent surge of adrenaline. She hadn't left in a frantic, emotional rage. She hadn't packed her things in tears. This was calculated. This was an eviction of him from her life, executed with the precision of a professional hit. "You think you can play with me?" Dante growled to the empty room, his phone flying out of his pocket. He dialed her number. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." His jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. He'd bypassed his corporate contacts and opened his private syndicate security application, pulling up the live and recorded feeds from the building's hidden lobby cameras. He rewound the footage to midnight, the exact time he had been ordering another round of expensive cognac for Suri. At exactly 12:15 a.m., the elevator doors in the lobby opened. Amara stepped out. She wasn't wearing any of the expensive clothes he had bought her to maintain his corporate consultant facade. She was wearing a simple denim jacket, carrying a single suitcase, and holding a small wooden box containing her traditional African textile looms, the only inheritance from her grandfather she had ever brought to Korea. Dante watched the screen, his breath catching in his throat. Amara didn't look back at the building. She walked straight through the glass doors into the pouring rain. A moment later, a heavily armored, matte black luxury convoy pulled up to the curb. The door opened, and a tall man in a flawlessly tailored charcoal suit stepped out into the rain, holding a massive black umbrella. He didn't just open the door for her. He bowed slightly, a gesture of profound respect, before shielding her from the storm as she climbed into the back seat. The man turned toward the camera for a split second before getting into the front. Dante's heart struck his ribs like a sledgehammer. It was Leo Tae-hyun Baek, the stone-cold, ruthlessly brilliant head of the Baekdu Syndicate, Dante's fiercest, deadliest underground rival. A man who had spent the last 3 years trying to systematically tear down the Vance Syndicate's territory. Dante slammed his fist into the marble island, cracking the plastic casing of his phone. "Leo," he whispered, his voice trembling with a terrifying mix of rage and disbelief. "You crossed the line. You dare to touch what belongs to me." Within 20 minutes, the quiet Mapogu penthouse was crawling with armed men. Dante's top captains, men who usually ordered executions with a blink of an eye, stood in a straight line, their heads bowed, terrified of the raw, volatile aura radiating from their leader. Dante stood by the window, his tailored jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal the heavy syndicate tattoos tracing his forearms. "Find her," Dante ordered, his voice dangerously low. "I don't care if you have to tear down every safe house in Seoul. I don't care if you have to start a war with the Baekdu family on the streets of Gangnam tonight. Bring my wife back to me." His primary captain, a hardened man named Jean, stepped forward cautiously. "Sir, if she is with Leo, she is inside the Baekdu stronghold. Entering their territory with weapons violates the 2021 neutrality treaty. The other council bosses will turn against us if we strike first." Dante turned around, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He walked up to Jean, grabbing him by the collar and pulling him down until their faces were inches apart. "Do I look like I care about a treaty, Jean? He took my wife. He went into my home and took what is mine. Gather the elite squad. We're going to Gangnam." "Boss, listen to reason for 1 second," Jean stammered, his eyes wide with genuine fear. "If Leo has her, it's a trap. He has been waiting for an excuse to get you on his turf. If we go in there guns blazing without a strategy, the Vance Syndicate will lose its standing with the overseas suppliers. They don't care about your marriage. They care about the shipments moving through the Incheon docks. Get your hands off my collar, Jean, and do what I told you," Dante hissed, dropping his captain with a vicious shove. "If the overseas suppliers have an issue, tell them to call me directly. No one dictates what I do with my property. If Leo thinks he can use a civilian to humiliate me, I will show him exactly why my family rules the ports." By 5:30 a.m., a fleet of 6 black SUVs tore through the quiet morning streets, heading straight for Leo's heavily fortified estate in the hills of Gangnam. Dante sat in the back of the lead vehicle, his hands gripping a heavy automatic pistol. His mind was spinning. How did she meet him? How long had this been going on? Had Amara been laughing behind his back while he was with Suri? The thought made his blood boil. He would kill Leo, and then he would drag Amara back to the penthouse and make her watch the execution. The SUVs slammed through the iron gates of the Baekdu estate, tires screeching on the wet gravel. Dante's men poured out, weapons raised, instantly surrounding the perimeter. But there was no ambush. The main doors of the traditional modern mansion slowly swung open. Standing on the porch, completely alone, dressed in a silk robe with a cigarette resting between his fingers, was Leo. He didn't have a weapon in his hand. He looked down at Dante's small army with an expression of pure, unadulterated boredom. Dante marched up the stone steps, his gun pointed straight at Leo's chest. "Where is she, Leo? Give her to me right now, or I will turn this house into a graveyard." Leo took a slow drag from his cigarette, blowing the smoke directly into Dante's face. He didn't even look at the gun. "You're making a lot of noise for a man who doesn't know how to look after his own property, Dante. Lower the weapon. You're waking up the neighborhood. I will blow your head off where you stand." Dante roared, the click of his gun's safety off echoing in the damp air. "Amara is my wife. You had your rats infiltrate my safe house. You targeted her to get to me." Leo slowly lowered his cigarette, his eyes turning from bored to ice cold in a fraction of a second. "Targeted her? You think this is about you, Dante? You truly are a pathetic, narcissistic piece of trash. I didn't infiltrate your safe house. Your wife called me. She used a burner phone to call the one man in this city who had the power to protect her from the ghost she was married to." "You're lying," Dante screamed, his hand trembling on the trigger. "She doesn't know who I am. She thinks I'm an architect. She loves me." Leo let out a dry, cynical laugh that cut through Dante like a blade. She used to love you, Dante, until she found the corporate documents, the asset registries, and the photos of you with that cheap influencer Suri in the VIP lounges. She found them 3 months ago, Dante, while you were playing the big, powerful Don in the clubs. Your wife was sitting in that cold apartment, realizing her entire 5-year marriage was a lie fabricated by a monster. Dante felt the ground shift beneath his feet. 3 months ago? No, she was fine. She was smiling. She was surviving. Leo corrected, stepping forward until the barrel of Dante's gun was pressing directly against his chest. She stayed for 3 months to systematically map out your entire financial network. She didn't just leave you, Dante. She took everything she needed to ensure you can never freeze her accounts or trap her legally. And as for why she is with me, let me tell you a little story from 5 years ago. Do you remember the turf hit on the southern docks? The one where your men opened fire on a civilian vehicle to eliminate a rogue captain? Dante's eyes widened slightly. That was business. That vehicle belonged to my family, Leo said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried a terrifying weight. My younger sister was in the back seat. She was 20 years old. She died in the hospital 3 days later because your men didn't bother to check their targets. I spent 5 years waiting for the perfect moment to tear your heart out. Dante, when Amara contacted me with your asset files, I thought the gods had handed me the ultimate weapon to destroy your empire from the inside out. Dante's face twisted in horror. You're using her. You're going to hurt her to get back at me. That was the plan, Leo said, a strange, bitter softness entering his voice. That was exactly what I intended to do. But then she walked into my house. She didn't ask for your money. She didn't ask for revenge. She just asked for a safe place to paint her fabrics and breathe without fear. I spent the last 3 months watching a woman rebuild her soul from the wreckage you left her with. I watched her deal with panic attacks, so severe she couldn't breathe, all while you were buying diamond for another woman. I started this to ruin you, Dante. But somewhere along the line, I realized that protecting her happiness was a much greater victory than killing you could ever be. She is safe. She is under my protection. If you fire that gun, my men will turn you and your captains into Swiss cheese before you hit the ground. Go home, Dante. You lost. Dante stood frozen, the gun heavy in his hand. He looked past Leo toward the second-floor windows of the mansion. For a fleeting second, he saw a shadow move behind the curtain, a familiar silhouette, a head of thick, beautiful curls. He wanted to scream her name, to force her to look at him, but Leo stepped directly into his line of sight, blocking the view. She doesn't want to see you, Leo said flatly. She has blocked your number, your mother's number, your captain's numbers. To her, you're already dead. Walk away. Dante's captains were muttering behind him, sensing the shifting tide. Dante knew that if he pulled the trigger now, it would mean total annihilation for both syndicates, and the council would execute whoever survived. With a trembling hand, he slowly lowered the weapon. This isn't over, Leo. She is my wife. A piece of paper won't change that. We'll see about that, Leo replied, turning his back on Dante and walking back into the house without looking behind him. The heavy oak doors shut with a definitive, echoing thud. Inside the sprawling mansion, away from the cold tension of the driveway, Amara stood by the high window of the guest suite, her fingers trembling against her coffee mug. She had heard the roaring of the luxury SUVs, had heard the screaming voice of the man she thought was her protector for half a decade. When Leo stepped back into the hallway, his face completely devoid of its usual mocking mask, she looked up, her breathing shallow. Did he leave? Amara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He left, Leo replied, closing the door softly behind him. He didn't approach her too quickly. He kept a respectful distance, knowing that the mere sound of a man's heavy footsteps could trigger her anxiety. He brought his elite squad, threw a tantrum, pointed a gun at my chest. The usual routine for a man who thinks he can threaten his way into getting what he threw away. Amara let out a shaky breath, sitting down on the edge of the velvet armchair. He looked so desperate. For 5 years, I lived with a man who pretended to worry about deadlines, who pretended to be stressed about architectural drawings. I used to pack him lunches, Leo, I used to stay up until midnight, making sure his clothes were ironed for his corporate presentations. To find out he was running executions, that he was controlling the very ports my grandfather's trade goods used to come through. It makes me feel like I've been living with a ghost. You were living with a narcissist, Amara, Leo said gently, setting a fresh pot of jasmine tea on the side table. A man who wanted a beautiful, silent sanctuary to wash the blood off his hands every night. He didn't want a wife. He wanted a hiding place. And the moment his hiding place developed a voice and a mind of its own, he realized how naked he actually is. He told me he loved me last night. Amara whispered, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. He called me from the club. I could hear the music in the background. I could hear a woman laughing right next to his microphone. And he told me he was stuck at a mandatory corporate dinner in Incheon. He didn't even try to make the lie believable anymore. He just assumed I was too foolish, too dependent on his money to care. Are you going to look at the documents he left on the table? Leo asked, gesturing to the heavy folder she had brought from the penthouse. No, Amara said, her gaze turning cold and sharp. Those documents are his corporate registries and his offshore accounts. I already sent the copies to your legal team. I don't want his money, Leo. I don't want a single one of his blood-stained inheritance. I just want my identity back. I want to build my studio. I want to dye my silk. I want to be the woman my grandfather raised, not the trophy a Mafia Don kept in a golden cage. My legal team has already established your sovereign accounts, Leo said, his voice dropping to a softer tone. He won't be able to touch your funds, and my enforcers will be stationed outside your Hongdae studio 24 hours a day. He can't freeze your life anymore, Amara. You're completely free. Amara looked up at Leo, her dark eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and caution. Why are you doing this, Leo? You hated his family. You wanted to destroy him. You told me yourself that your sister died because of his men. Why aren't you using me to execute him? Leo stopped, his hands resting on the back of the opposite chair. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the faint patter of rain against the glass. I wanted to, Leo admitted, his voice entirely devoid of its usual criminal bravado. When you first reached out to me through that encrypted channel, I thought the universe had handed me the perfect razor to slit his throat. I wanted to take everything he owned, reveal his identity to the council, and watch him get executed by his own people. But then you arrived at my gate with nothing but a suitcase and a box of wooden looms. You didn't ask me for a weapon. You didn't ask me to kill him. You just asked for a room with good light so you could finish your textile patterns. I spent 5 years surrounded by people who only talk about blood, betrayal, and territorial power. Watching you quietly mix your indigo dyes, watching you rebuild your life with nothing but your own 2 hands, it did something to me, Amara. I realized that keeping you safe, watching you smile without fear, is a far more devastating defeat to Dante than a bullet could ever be. He thinks he can buy the world. I want to show him that he couldn't even keep the most valuable thing he ever had. Amara looked at him, her chest rising and falling as the weight of his words settled over her. For the first time in 5 years, she was looking at a man who didn't want to hide behind her, a man who didn't view her presence as a performance. Thank you, Leo, she said softly. Dante returned to his penthouse, but it no longer felt like a home. It felt like a tomb. He spent the next 2 weeks in a state of quiet, dangerous madness. He refused to go to the clubs. He kicked Suri out of his sight the moment she tried to sit on his lap, throwing her designer purse into the hallway and telling her that if he ever saw her face again, he would have her father's territory seized. He became obsessed with reclaiming control. He sent his men to deliver massive bouquets of rare black roses and millions of won worth of emerald jewelry to the independent art studio Amara had recently rented in Hongdae. Every single delivery was returned to his headquarters within an hour, unopened, with the exact same sticky note attached to the box. Please stop. His captains watched his descent with growing alarm. Inside the Vance Syndicate's hidden boardroom in the basement of a shipping warehouse, the air was thick with smoke and unspoken mutiny. Jean, the primary captain, slammed a set of financial printouts onto the table in front of Dante, who sat with a half-empty bottle of whiskey, staring blankly at the wall. Boss, we are losing our grip. Jean said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. The Southeast Asian cartel just delayed their shipment by 2 weeks. They are hearing rumors that you brought an entire armed squad into Baekdu territory over a domestic dispute. They think you're losing your mind. The Council of Elders is calling an emergency session. They want to know why our leader is sending millions of won and emeralds to a textile studio in Hongdae while our distribution lines are stalling. Dante didn't look at the printouts. He took a slow, agonizing sip from his glass, his eyes dark and hollow. Amara is returning the jewelry, Jean. Why is she returning it? I bought her the emeralds she looked at in the Gangnam boutique 2 years ago. She wanted them. I remember she stared at them for 10 minutes. She doesn't care about the emeralds, Dante, Jean shouted, breaking protocol out of sheer frustration. She left you. She signed the divorce papers. The ring is at the bottom of a jar of calligraphy ink in your kitchen. She has completely erased herself from your life, and you are letting the entire empire collapse because your pride is wounded. Dante's head snapped up, his gaze fixing on Jean with a lethal intensity that made the other captains in the room hold their breath. My pride? You think this is about my pride, Jean? She was the only thing in my life that didn't involve an execution order. She was the only person who didn't look at me and see a monster. And Leo has her. He is sitting in his mansion, looking at my wife, laughing at me. I will burn the entire shipping network to the ground before I let Leo keep what is mine. She isn't yours anymore. Jean stepped back, throwing his hands in the air. The legal team just confirmed it. Her lawyers bypassed our corporate front and filed the final decree through a high court judge who is completely out of our pocket. She didn't ask for alimony. She didn't ask for the penthouse. She literally stripped her name from your existence. If you try to force her back, Leo's enforcers will involve the national police, and our entire offshore asset registry will be exposed to the Ministry of Finance. You need to drop this, Don Vance. Focus on the summit next week, or the elders will replace you before the month ends. Dante didn't answer. He waved his hand, dismissing his captains like a king dismissing beggars. He was left alone in the dark boardroom, his mind consumed by a singular, toxic objective. He had to see her. He had to force her to understand that his power wasn't a lie. It was the shield he used to keep her safe. The next afternoon, Dante bypassed his guards, got into an unmarked sedan, and drove to the traditional market in Mapo where he knew Amara used to purchase her natural clothing dyes. He waited for 2 hours, his eyes scanning the crowd of ordinary citizens, until he finally spotted her. She was carrying a canvas bag, her natural curls bouncing as she walked up to an elderly vendor stall, picking up a jar of deep indigo dye. She looked lighter. The deep lines of stress that had lined her forehead for the last 2 years were completely gone. Dante stepped out of the car, his long black trench coat billowing around him as he closed the distance. Amara, he said, his voice cracking with a desperate, heavy arrogance. Amara froze, her shoulders tensing instantly. She didn't turn around immediately. She took a slow, deep breath, stabilizing her posture before turning to face the man who had been her husband. Yihon, or whatever your captains call you. I told your delivery men to stop coming to my studio. I have nothing left to say to you. Amara, listen to me for 1 second. Dante pleaded, stepping closer, his hands reaching out into the empty air between them. The girl, Suri, she meant nothing to me. She was just the daughter of a business associate. I used her to secure a distribution line in the Southern District. It was a performance, Amara. Everything I did in those clubs was just to build a world where you never had to worry about money, where you never had to suffer like your family did when they first arrived here. Amara looked at him, her dark eyes completely devoid of the warmth he had taken for granted for half a decade. A performance? You spent 5 years pretending to be an ordinary architect. Dante, you watched me cry when our rent was late 3 years ago, pretending you were waiting for a corporate bonus, while you had millions sitting in Cayman accounts. You let me live a lie because you want a pet who didn't ask questions. You didn't hide your identity to protect me. Dante, you hid it because you knew that if I ever saw the blood on your hands, I would have walked out the very first day. Do not use my family's struggles to justify your greed. I did it because I love you, Dante shouted, his voice drawing the attention of the surrounding market shoppers. "I built an empire so no one could ever touch us. Look at what you're doing now. Living in a tiny studio in Hongdae, buying cheap dyes from a market stall. Come home, Amara. I will buy you an entire fashion house in the center of Apgujeong. You can have whatever you want. Just leave Leo's house." "You still think everything has a price tag," Amara said, her voice dropping to a freezing, absolute calm that cut deeper than any blade. "I am happier in my tiny, freezing studio than I ever was in your sterile penthouse. I'm making my own patterns. I am breathing air that doesn't smell like deception." The divorce papers were finalized by the judge this morning. "Dante, we are legally strangers. If you ever come near my market or my studio again, I will hand the remaining encrypted files of your shipping manifest to the International Maritime Authority. Do not test me. I am not the quiet little bird you kept in your cage anymore." "Amara, wait." Dante stepped forward, his fingers reaching out to grab her wrist, to force her to stay and listen to his desperation. Before his skin could even touch her sleeve, a massive, heavy hand clamped down on his shoulder with enough force to ground him to the pavement. It was one of Leo's top enforcers, a towering man named Min, backed by 3 other silent operatives who had quietly emerged from the crowd of shoppers. "The lady asked you to leave, Mr. Vance," Min said, his voice flat, low, and entirely dangerous. His hand tightened on Dante's shoulder, his fingers digging into the muscle. "Our instructions are very clear. If you touch her, we are authorized to eliminate the threat right here on the pavement. Walk back to your car." Dante looked past the enforcer's shoulder, begging Amara with his eyes to say something, to show a single flicker of the woman who used to kiss his cheek before he left for his fake corporate meetings. But Amara didn't look back. She quietly handed her cash to the vendor, took her canvas bag of indigo dye, and walked away into the crowded alleyway, her silhouette disappearing into the sea of ordinary people. Dante was forced to retreat to his sedan, his mind spinning, his heart twisting into a knot of black, unadulterated rage. He had been rejected not by a rival king, but by the woman who had once defined his humanity. The final, explosive escalation came 3 weeks later. To reassert his dominance over the changing underworld landscape and prove to the other bosses that the Vance Syndicate was still the apex predator despite the rumors of his instability, Dante hosted a massive, mandatory underworld summit at the Grand Hyatt Hotel in Gangnam. The ballroom was magnificent, filled with massive crystal chandeliers, high-ranking international investors, foreign political figures, and every major crime boss from across East Asia. Dante stood at the head of the main banquet table, his tailored black velvet suit immaculate. Suri once again glued to his side in a desperate, public attempt to show the world that his life was perfectly intact, that his throne was undisturbed. He was drinking heavily, his glass never empty, his eyes scanning the grand entrance doors, waiting for Leo to show up so he could humiliate him in front of the Supreme Council. At exactly 9 p.m., the heavy double doors of the grand ballroom swung open. The murmuring of the 100 elite guests died down instantly, replaced by a tense, suffocating silence. Leo walked in, looking effortlessly regal in a dark charcoal tuxedo, his posture relaxed, his hands casually in his pockets. But he wasn't alone. Walking beside him, her arm elegantly looped through his, was Amara. She looked breathtaking. She wasn't wearing the simple, muted clothes she used to wear in the Mapo penthouse to match his fake consultant lifestyle. She was wearing a magnificent custom-designed gown that fused traditional African diaspora patterns with a modern, sleek Korean silhouette, a masterpiece she had designed and sewn with her own hands in her Hongdae studio. Her hair was styled perfectly, her dark skin glowing brilliantly under the crystal chandeliers. She carried herself with the grace of an absolute queen who had finally discovered her true throne. The entire room of hardened criminals, billionaire investors, and elite politicians turned to look at her, completely captivated by her beauty, her presence, and her absolute composure. Dante's crystal glass shattered in his hand, the premium red wine spilling over his fingers like fresh, warm blood. He didn't even feel the sharp shards of glass cutting into his palm. His eyes were locked with a terrifying intensity on Amara's hand, which was resting comfortably against Leo's arm. Leo was looking down at her, a genuine, soft smile on his face. A look Leo had never given another human being in his entire public life as a ruthless syndicate boss. Suri noticed Dante's expression, her face twisting into a mask of pure venom as she tightened her grip on his arm. Look at her, trying to play high society with your deadliest rival. She's just a classless, penniless outsider who doesn't even belong in this country. She's probably sleeping with him just to get back at. Shut your mouth, Dante hissed, his voice dangerously low as he shoved Suri away from him, so hard she stumbled back against a waiter, sending a tray of champagne glasses crashing to the floor. Blinded by a toxic, volatile cocktail of jealousy, shattered ego, and pure, possessive madness, Dante lost all remaining sanity. He forgot the Council of Elders. He forgot the neutrality treaty. He forgot the international investors and the cameras lining the balcony. He marched across the marble floor, his heavy footsteps echoing loudly in the sudden, dead silence of the ballroom. His captains, including Jean, tried to reach out to stop him, but Dante blew past them like a hurricane, his eyes fixed solely on the man holding his wife. He cornered Leo and Amara near the center of the floor. "Amara!" Dante roared, his voice booming through the high-ceilinged space. "Get away from him right now. You are humiliating my family name in front of my associates. Stand by my side where you belong." Amara didn't flinch. She didn't take a single step back. She stepped slightly in front of Leo, shielding him with her own presence, her eyes looking at Dante with a cold, absolute calmness that made him feel entirely transparent. "I don't belong to you, Dante. I told you before, the court finalized the papers this morning. I am an independent guest of the Baekdu family, invited here to showcase my textile brand to the international investors. Step back and control your temper. You are my wife," Dante screamed, his face contorting with a terrifying rage as he looked at Leo, who was standing there with a look of pure, unadulterated amusement in his eyes. "You think you can take what is mine, Leo? You think you can use my woman to mock my lineage in front of the council? She isn't a piece of shipping territory, Dante," Leo said smoothly, his voice carrying clearly to every listening ear in the silent ballroom. But then again, a man who spends his nights hiding in cheap Gangnam VIP lounges wouldn't know the difference between a treasure and a trophy. She chose to be here, with me, because I don't need to hide who I am to deserve her company. You son of a bitch. Dante lost all control. He pulled his right fist back and launched a brutal, heavy punch straight into Leo's face. The impact was loud, a sharp, sickening crack that echoed through the ballroom. Leo's head snapped violently to the side, and he stumbled back 2 steps, his hand instantly going up to his mouth. Amara gasped, stepping toward Leo, her hands gently checking his face. The entire room erupted into pure chaos. Weapons clicked under tables as Vance captains and Baekdu enforcers drew their firearms, preparing for a total bloodbath on the hotel floor. Dante stood there, his chest heaving, his fist covered in Leo's blood, expecting Leo to draw his gun, expecting a violent reaction that would validate his own rage. But Leo didn't draw a weapon. He slowly lowered his hand from his lip, checking the bright crimson blood staining his thumb. He looked up at Dante, and then he did something that completely dismantled Dante's entire existence. Leo broke into a slow, quiet, deeply mocking laugh. The laugh grew louder, echoing off the high marble walls of the ballroom, rich with genuine amusement and completely devoid of fear. He wiped the blood from his jaw with the back of his hand, looking at Dante as if he were a pathetic, weak child throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. "Is that all you've got, Don Vance?" Leo asked, his voice entirely steady, his posture relaxed as he stepped back up to Dante. "You just struck an Apex boss at a neutral council summit, in front of every major investor from Tokyo to Singapore. You didn't just break the treaty, Dante. You proved to everyone in this room that you are an unstable, emotional child who loses his mind over a woman who doesn't even remember his name. Look around you." Dante looked around the room, his heart suddenly freezing solid. The other syndicate bosses weren't looking at Leo with judgment. They were looking at Dante with absolute disgust and pity. They whispered to each other, shaking their heads in disapproval. In their world, a leader who could be broken so easily by his own personal jealousy was a massive liability. A man who lost his temper in public over an ex-wife was a man who couldn't be trusted with millions of dollars in maritime trade routes. By remaining completely unbothered, by laughing at the punch, Leo had completely stripped Dante of his power dynamic. He had made Dante look weak, foolish, and entirely small. Within 48 hours, the financial fallout was catastrophic for the Vance Syndicate. The international shipping conglomerates officially backed out of their distribution deals, stating they could no longer do business with a leader who was a public security liability. Dante's corporate stocks cratered. His own council members began a quiet mutiny, demanding he step down from his position before the entire global empire collapsed under the weight of his reckless behavior. To finish the job and ensure Amara would never be harassed again, Leo went completely nuclear. He didn't use bullets or corporate hits. He leaked concrete, verified transaction logs, offshore bank accounts, and surveillance footage detailing Dante's years of corporate fronting and criminal affairs directly to the highest investigative authorities in the country. In doing so, Leo deliberately sacrificed a multi-million-dollar shipping contract of his own that was linked to one of those routes, proving to Amara that he valued her peace of mind far more than his own financial gain or criminal throne. The downfall was swift and absolute. Suri and her father completely abandoned the Vance Syndicate the moment the government asset seizures began, turning their backs on Dante to save their own local territory from the fallout. Dante was officially stripped of his title by his own board of directors, left as a ghost king inside his massive, freezing family compound. He spent his days sitting on the floor of his empty living room, surrounded by empty bottles of liquor, obsessively rewinding old security videos on his phone. Videos from 5 years ago, back when they were poor, living in a tiny, cramped room in Mapo, and Amara would laugh genuinely as she cooked simple ramen for him. He realized the brutal, crushing truth. He hadn't lost her the night she left the clay pot on the counter. He had lost her across 5 years, in the hundreds of lonely, quiet nights where he chose his criminal ego over her heart. 3 months later, the legal separation was absolute, and Dante was nothing more than a civilian with a fractured legacy and an empty name. It was a cold, snowy afternoon in December. Dante was walking aimlessly through a vibrant winter market in Seoul, his collar pulled up high to shield his weathered face from the biting wind. The city was alive with festive music, bright decorations, and the warm smell of roasted chestnuts. Suddenly, a sound cut through the noise of the crowd, a rich, vibrant, beautiful laugh that he would recognize even if he were deaf. Dante stopped dead on the pavement, his heart stopping in his chest. He looked through the crowd of shoppers, under a canopy of glowing winter string lights. Standing next to a stall selling handmade traditional fabrics was Amara. She was radiant, her face full of life, completely free of the exhaustion and sorrow that had plagued her for years. She was laughing uncontrollably at something said by the man standing next to her. It was Leo. He was wearing a casual long wool coat. His usual cold, hard criminal expression completely melted away as he looked down at her. He looked at her as if she were the only thing in the entire city worth seeing. Amara reached up, her gloved fingers gently adjusting the collar of Leo's coat to protect him from the falling snow. Leo smiled, catching her hand and kissing the palm gently before tucking it into his own pocket, keeping her warm against the winter chill. As they turned to leave the stall, Amara's eyes happened to glance across the street. Her gaze landed directly on Dante, standing alone on the pavement. Dante frozen, his breath catching in his throat, a desperate, pathetic hope rising in his chest that she would see his misery, that she would show some anger, some hatred, some remnant of emotion. Anything to prove he still mattered to her. But Amara didn't frown. She didn't look away in rage. Her dark eyes passed right over Dante's face like a pane of clear glass. There was no hatred, no recognition, no pain left in her heart. He was a total stranger to her, a ghost from a past life she had completely moved on from. She turned back to Leo, her beautiful smile returning instantly, and they walked away hand in hand, disappearing into the falling snow and the warm lights of the market. Dante stood frozen on the pavement, the heavy snow settling on his shoulders, finally understanding the true, devastating cost of his arrogance. He was completely invisible, left alone in the freezing dark with the wreckage of an empire he chose over the only woman who had ever truly loved him. If this story gripped you and you want to see more high-stakes emotional dramas, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on all notifications, leave a comment below with your favorite twist from a story, and give this video a thumbs up to help us beat the algorithm. Your support keeps these stories alive.